Hello and welcome. I'm Lola Odubekun, the Interim Vice Chancellor at USIU, and I have with me this morning Grace Loreto. Welcome, Grace. Thank you for being here. I know we've been hoping to have this conversation for a while, so I appreciate your patience, and I'd love to hear from you about how this project began, what it entails, and really what your motivation for it is.
Okay, so essentially Leading on Purpose, which is the title of this show, is essentially an ode to my father. He instilled a sense of responsibility towards the world in me, teaching me that my academic capacity was not just about me, and intellect was about serving the world and not weaponizing your brain to sort of antagonize people, you know. So this show is essentially the work that he put in me and I am giving back to the world, because we speak about the importance of leadership. We also speak about how the SDGs shape different leaders by creating a framework that leaders have to follow in order to ensure that they create sustainable impact into the world. So that's essentially the overview of this show.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. And when I think about the SDGs and the MDGs, I think here at USIU, we were and are doing a lot of that thinking, and it's encompassed in our vision, our mission, and our values. And so while the focus of your project would be sort of the governmental level, what a government's doing, I think there is room, you know, for us to talk about what the university's doing and how that big picture thinking operates at our level at USIU-Africa.
Definitely. I would like to know from you, how did you get to where you are today, and how has that inspired the work that you do in USIU?
Okay, well, my being here as the Interim Vice Chancellor was a serendipitous event. Unfortunately, the previous Vice Chancellor had to leave. And the University Council felt that it was important for us to stabilize the campus prior to the arrival of a new Vice Chancellor. And so we knew we were going to undertake a global search for a new Vice Chancellor. And as the saying goes, desperate times sometimes call for, let's say, innovative measures. And so in an ideal sense, when one's serving in governance, which I was, as a member of the University Council, you don't sort of get into the weeds and become part of the administration. But that was what we needed to do. And when that vote happened and I was told it would be great if I could come to Nairobi and fill in while we did the search, I thought, oh, okay, serendipity, this is a wonderful way to end the years of my service at USIU, which began around 2009 as Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees, and then later in 2014 as Chair of the University Council, you know, to end having served in a totally different capacity, and one that I did not expect to be in. So I'll say serendipity, but then perhaps it was good that I started out in law and criminal justice. So I consider myself a social scientist because having studied law in Nigeria, I worked as a prosecutor and noticed a conflict. We had death penalty cases, and whenever I would interview the witnesses of the deceased party, they would say, oh no, you know, this is fine. We have forgiven the person who murdered our relative, usually a brother, an uncle or something. And for me there was a conflict in what I was doing in seeking the death penalty for people who were saying, no, 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 we've forgiven. As a family, as a community, we have forgiven. And Nigeria is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, really diverse country, huge population. And so I felt there was a need to dig a little deeper, not just be part of a cog in the legal machinery, but maybe figure out how to collect data and understand what we were doing as a system, which is why I left to study criminal justice, which looks at the entire system, from the community to police, courts, corrections, probation, the entire system. And then as part of community service, I guess, when I came to Kenya from the US, I was asked to help design the new then criminal justice program, and did that as a consultant, and then was asked to come and join the Board of Trustees. And so it's been this journey. I've sort of followed my nose and followed my interest, I think, in being at this point. But for us as a university, it felt important for me to be able to contribute to stabilizing the university as we conducted that search. And so for one full academic year, it's been a joy. I've had a sense of fulfillment, and I hope that looking back, I will be able to say, well, I did a few things that were worthwhile.
Speaking about doing things which are worthwhile, what are some of the values that you believe have shaped the person that you are? Because upholding a position such as this, I believe it takes character. So that must definitely be informed by some values that you uphold dearly. What are some of them?
Yeah. Let's see. I think one is trying to keep my promises. And so if I say I'll do something, then I need to move on that. And I need to be true to the person to whom, or the people to whom I've made that promise. So keeping promises or one's word, and being true to that. And I'm a work in progress, and so we've postponed a few times. I'd say yes, come on this day, and one or two things interfere. I do think also being able to step out of one's comfort zone is important, and being willing to learn something new. And so this is nothing I've done in the past. Yes, in some ways, I've led teams of people at work and so on. I've done thinking around what universities should be and how we can function well. I've served on committees at universities, and I've served, in the non-profit sector. And so I think all that comes together to say, to some extent, this notion of stepping outside one's work or one's comfort zone to do something different, not just because you might enjoy it, but because it's important, because it's relevant. And I think a sense of patience perhaps is important. When I remember when I was young, my siblings and I at Christmas would have to wait to open presents. So my mother was a nurse. We'd go off on Christmas Day to the hospital because Father Christmas was coming to give gifts to the children in the ward. And so we would help, open up the presents. And these are children in the hospital beds on a holiday. And looking back, I found I was struck with that. After the Christmas party in the hospital, then we'd go home and have our home lunch and so on. And so that deferred gratification, I think, is something that's important. Being able to say, I'll hold off for a while on what I really want to do, go out and play, open my presents, eat, because there's something else happening. We're going to the hospital. And as an adult, I think perhaps even doing the dissertation, it's something that can take years, but I got into mine because I was interested. But then you realize it's a pretty long process. And even doing the data analysis is, you have to slog at it. And so I think being willing to keep at a project or an assignment, even though it's difficult, even though you're tired, even though it might be taxing, is I guess, I'm not sure if one would call it a value, but I think it's a character trait that comes in useful. But generally speaking, perhaps not looking at myself, looking at other people, definitely a sense of integrity and fearlessness to some extent, I think, but having also a sense that one is part of community, however that community is defined, and so not just living within your own comfortable sense of community, but being willing to step out and engage with others, I think is important. You and I both went to IB schools, you know, and the International Baccalaureate curriculum, I think, is helpful for that. You know, there is that notion that it's not just about us and who we are, it's about others whose life situation might be quite different. So I hope that answers the question.
It definitely does, and it brings me to want to highlight this point of education not just being for the person who's undergoing the system itself, because there's a misconception in our world that your intelligence is supposed to elevate you and it is for you alone, right? So how would you say that understanding that your intelligence was a tool of service, not necessarily something to sort of elevate you alone, how has that helped you in your journey, especially serving as the IVC of USIU?
I think it has helped because at a university people want, for example, to know that there's a level of education that the person serving as the Vice Chancellor, for example, has, and that faculty can relate to someone who's been through similar experiences, you know, the slog of achieving in terms of your profession or your education. But I think then one realizes that there's actually more to it. Yes, intellect is essential, but it's also heart, because when you're interacting with people and working toward a common goal, an ability to listen as well as relate on a human level becomes really, really important, because we've got a wide range of academic backgrounds, of personal backgrounds, of levels, you know, of structure within the university. And so having an ability to speak with anyone and to listen, and not sort of adopt the approach that I'm at the top of the pyramid and therefore my ideas, you know, or my feelings, or my approach to things come first. But being willing to say, in addition to that academic ability and that, I think that with that comes an ability to analyze and, you know, present and articulate the vision and so on, is a real need to be able to participate in community and encourage as well, you know, the sense of community. Because you find here at USIU, there are many micro communities. You know, we've got, in addition to those multiple governance levels, we've got the students and staff and faculty and women and, you know, the men and those who work for the university, those who are part of an outside group that comes in to provide services, and people tend to hover in those little groups. And the times when we can actually overlap and come together, we have this mantra, we are one. You know, I think it's important if one's able to say, I don't just relate to the educated, I relate to others, you know, who perform vital functions, and kind of see it as an interconnected web of relationships. And also I talked about Nigeria being multi-ethnic. Same here in Kenya. And also, I mean, you're from Zambia and Lesotho. And so as Africans, we're not necessarily the same. You know, yes, at USIU, we have students coming from 51 of the 55, 54, 55, depending on who you count, African countries. But, you know, there's a difference also culturally. There are some things that are definitely similar, but there's a lot that's different. And so I do think it's essential for us to do as much as we can to fit in to those micro communities, but recognize that that web needs to be unified, you know, as deeply as possible.
I think one of the most incredible things about coming to USIU for me personally is the fact that I've seen that there's a celebration of diversity as opposed to just looking for similarity, even though we are not so similar. And it has sort of sensitized me to different cultures, right? So how can you probably advise, or not necessarily just advise, but how have you personally contributed to instilling a sense of global citizenship in the students at USIU? And how important do you think that is?
I think it's hugely important. It's really fundamental to what we aspire to. You know, USIU was started by Dr. William Rust with the idea of strengthening global unity through education. In terms of how I have impacted that, it remains to be seen, but one of the things that I've really enjoyed is beginning to get to know students, the student leadership, people like you who just come up with an idea and say, I'd like to talk to you about leadership. I've come across students in walking across campus and just hearing a little bit about who they are. And so what I would hope is that I've been encouraging. You know, it is hugely important, but I hope that I've been encouraging because I'm really impressed. And I say that honestly with the caliber, you know, of student leadership that we have here at USIU. And even if people don't consider themselves leaders, you know, like you, I would say absolutely you're forging a path, you know, that others might not have the courage, you know, or the conviction or the willingness to do. And I think it is stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's part of leadership. Being willing to step out of your comfort zone, because that does contribute. People are looking at you, are watching you, and are learning from you.